Hello, hello. Okay, so here I am again, and I managed to stream a little bit yesterday, and it looks like I managed to do a little bit today also, and yesterday I mainly talked about what the status of my Isekai story is. Today I will do a little bit of that also, but I also hope to read a bit to be able to get a little bit further in the narrative that I have read so far. And I did work a little bit on the story today, and I think I have found a way to make the ending work. So one problem I had was that I first wrote one ending that I wanted to use, and then as the story changed, it became more and more difficult to apply that ending, and I also had a problem of how I would solve the problems that appear in the end of the story, because you obviously have some kind of conflict, some kind of antagonist that does his things, and I did have the solution to how the antagonist would be handled, but there was the fallout from that I didn't really know how to address, but or rather, I had some ideas of how it could be done, but those ideas required quite a lot of time. So so far the story has been moving along rather quickly. There hasn't been much. There hasn't been that much time that has passed. It's perhaps been a couple of days. The last part I wrote, they traveled a couple of days, so I think at most the time from the start of the story until the point that marks the end of part 2 is a week, something like that. I haven't counted it, but I think that's sort of the most likely time span, and consequence of that is that there's of course only so much that can happen, especially when you look at things like skill level and so on. So the protagonist comes into this world as a hero, and you can of course say that he's fully skilled and able to use all his powers and so on, but well, I haven't done that so far, so there will need to be some sort of natural progression to what he is able to do, and that means that there will need to be some kind of passage of time if he's supposed to have all sorts of different skills and abilities that require time to obtain. So my alternatives were to either have a long passage of time during the third part of the story, or I would have to think of something else. And it turned out that alternative B, thinking of something else, worked. So I did manage to find a way to handle the conflicts that show up in a way that mainly makes use of the things that the hero has encountered and experienced in this world so far. And I need to say it myself, of course. Nobody else is going to say it, but I think I'm quite satisfied with how it turned out. And I also managed to flesh out the one of the new characters that I haven't had the party encounter yet. That's probably the next scene that I'm going to write, but she ends up playing a quite significant role, and there's also the background story between her and one of the other characters that, well, I thought it was somewhat amusing at least, so I enjoyed reading it after I had written it, so that was satisfactory. And the practical consequence of this is that and I think I can write the last part, third part of the story, the main first story arc, and there's of course some details that I don't know yet, but the overall things, the overall structure of what will happen, meaning how it starts out and how it ends. Those pieces are more or less in place. What I need is some of the things that happen in between, and depending on what happens in between, I will end up either having a longish or shortish part 3. I do think there's some opportunities to have several things happen, but since I now can do this on a short time frame inside the story, perhaps there won't be that much that happens. But I guess I'll find out when I start writing that bit. There are some things that will need to happen in order to make things flow the way they should, so we'll see how it ends up. They can't just go where they are going and then meet the antagonist and then they fight. There will have to be something else, and the way that the status as seen from the characters in the story is at the end, or rather near the end of part 2, is that they know that there's something going on, but they don't know why and who is behind it. And this sort of finding out bit is what will hopefully make up a big part of the third part. And the details of that I don't know yet. But before we come to the third part, we will have to finish the first part, and I don't think I'll be able to do that today, but I can at least try to progress a little bit, and that is what I'll do. So, to recap a little bit, so the party has they basically found out that there's somebody that is mass producing walls that have some flaws that can potentially be problematic if purchased by, for example, the nation states that they are being offered to. And it seems like there's this trading company that is involved in this type of scheme, whatever it is, and the party attempts to travel with this trading company, but they are rudely rebuffed, and they end up following them from the air instead, and they see that they appear to have faked an attack on the caravan by the Demon Kingdom, and possibly they want to try to ignite some kind of conflict. And that's where the last part ended. So, the sun was rising, and it was a breathtaking sight to see the beautiful land below us being lit up by the sun. But I could not manage to enjoy it. The smoke from the burning wagons, having gotten into our clothes, carried the smell with us. A little later, we sat again in the room near the top of Onyx Tower, where we had had our little chat shortly after I first met him. As that time, Onyx had landed us on a mountain and gotten out a magical trapdoor. We all appeared to be lost in our thoughts. Eventually, I broke the silence. I am not entirely sure if I understand what is going on. But it appears that we were witness to an attempted false flag attack. Someone trying to set up a conflict with the Demon Kingdom. That seems very possible, Ilareth answered. The simplest explanation is that Belrock is trying to create a war between the Demon Kingdom and the countries closest to it. Since they are also selling wands to the armies of these kingdoms, they obviously have a financial incentive to do this, but does it end there? Yes, good question, Onyx answered. We know the wands are flawed. Is this part of the plan, or simply a limitation in what they can achieve when mass-producing wands? I added, if it is deliberate, what could they hope to achieve? If they manage to start a major conflict between the Demon Kingdom and their neighbors, what is the likely outcome if, at least, the non-demon nations are using the mass-produced wands? Could all countries involved in the conflict be weakened enough for Belrock to have any realistic chance of defeating all of them? That does not seem likely, Ylvis asked. Unless they have gotten very much more powerful, this seems unrealistic. No matter how powerful they are still a very small country with a small population. There are limits to what they can achieve. Yes, Onyx followed that. What I have seen of their magical items is also not very impressive, unless they are deliberately being careful with who have access to the really important items. They are not really anything special. The most impressive thing they have done that I am aware of is being able to create a way of mass-producing magical items. Yes, Silret said. There must still be something that we are missing or unaware of. What about the Demon Kingdom, I asked? Could they in some way be involved in this? Does not that seem unlikely? Onyx asked. Why would they need to set up the attack in that way if they were involved? They could have actually attacked for real, in which case there would be no chance of the subterfuge used here to be discovered, unless that was the plan. But that seems unnecessarily convoluted. So, what is most likely to happen now, I asked. I assume the guard leader and the mage will travel to Stonewall, and when they get there, say that they were attacked by the Demon Lord army. The king will send someone to investigate, and they will find the bird caravan. It could be spun as the caravan having run into a scouting party from the Demon army, which attacks the caravan to avoid being discovered. But the caravan being too well guarded, the attack fails and the attackers are defeated. The only survivors escape to tell a tale. The neighboring countries, already concerned about the Demon Lord, continues building up their armies with renewed intensity. They purchase more wands from Belrock. But Onyx and Ylris nodded. I continued, but I assume this by itself is not enough to start a war, so either they will be satisfied with pocketing the money, or they must be planning something more. They both agreed. Let's continue to Stonewall. We must know how this plays out. Onyx said. Not long after, we were again soaring up towards the sky, and then changing direction. Onyx took us towards Stonewall at a high speed, the landscape below flying by. It did not take long before I could see a change in the lands we were flying above. The wide open field of the wilderness was replaced with farmland. The number of roads increased along with the amount of people and carriages we could see. The mage and the guard leader did have a head start, but unless they had horses prepared nearby, it would probably take them some time to reach a place where they could either get fast horses themselves or where they could notify someone with a fast horse. There was a good chance that we could reach Stonewall before the news of the supposed attack reached the town. As the name implied, Sternhold was a town surrounded by a high wall. Partly situated on a mountain, the town looked like it had started with a castle high on a defensible position. Then the town had gradually grown from there. It looked like the town was split among several levels, small ones with big buildings near the top. Then a larger area near the lower portion of the mountains covering the mountain encircling completely. The big wall that likely gave the town its name surrounded this lower portion. Below this, there were sprawling buildings covering a large part of the area around the wall outside the wall. These buildings gradually gave away to farmland with some smaller villages, with some smaller village-like areas dotted around the area. What looked like they had once been smaller separate villages had been gradually enveloped by the expanding town. Onyx took us down near one of the village-like areas some distance from the main town, and we half ran to a place where we could rent horses. Not ever having ridden a horse, I got to ride the same horse as Ylvis, she smiling patiently while I attempted to get up behind her, holding her tightly from behind to avoid falling off. Both Onyx and Ylvis appeared to be very proficient riders, and we set off at a high speed along the road. Swerving between wagons and people pushing carts, those walking, jumping to the side of the road in panic as we came racing down the road. Leaving the horses at an inn near the main gate, we joined the flow of people on their way into the city. My floppy hat safely stuffed on my coat, all three were in inconspicuous mode, wearing grey cloaks without any special markings, with the hoods well over our heads. Having reached our target, we now walked slowly, trying to discern whether we had arrived before news of the attack. We closely absorbed the main gate. Everything looked quiet. Merchants, peasants, the odd traveller on a horse were all slowly making their way into the town. Guardsmen were standing on each side of the gate, but they looked bored, glancing uninterestedly at the crowds that were passing by them into the city. There did not appear to be any type of control of who was entering the city. No signs of alertness or heightened security. It looked like we had made it on time. We slowed down, letting people walk past us as we slowly got closer to the gate. We were almost at the gate when Onyx leaned close to me. Go talk to one of the guards. It doesn't matter about what, just try to drag out time. I nodded nervously, trying to see if there were any of the guards that were friendly looking. On one side of the gate, I saw what looked like a slightly overweight merchant that was jovially talking with a short, black-haired guard holding a spear that was more than twice his height. As I got closer, I could hear the conversation, or rather, what the merchant was saying at the guard, as the guard nodded along uninterestedly. You never know what you need before you need it, I thought, so I picked up the weird rock, and there below it I saw something glittering, reflecting the sky, and I tell no lie, it was a silver coin. He waved his right hand, holding up what looked like a rock. A silver coin, I tell you, this rock is my lucky rock. I still keep it on me to this day, with this rock. The guard had noticed me approaching and was looking in my direction. The man with the rock stopped talking and also looked towards me. Excuse me, fine sirs, I started, still unsure how to properly greet someone in this land, but intent on keeping up my pretense of coming from a faraway land, not incorrect. I am new to this town, having newly arrived here after a long journey. Not being familiar with the area, I was hoping to learn where I could go to have a fine meal and a good night's sleep, hopefully within the modest budget of a traveller that is not a wealthy man. I attempted to smile innocently. The guard, seemingly glad to have a distraction from the conversation with the merchant, grabbed the opportunity and started recommending several places nearby worth visiting. The merchant, not wanting to be left out of the conversation, also joined in, and not before long, I had received an invitation to visit his humble home in the city, and having guided me around some of the better and more affordable places in town. It was at this point the guards around us suddenly started becoming more alert. The guard I had been talking with also shifted his attention to something behind me. I turned and there was a cloud of dust forming some distance down the road. Somebody was riding towards the city gate at full speed, shouting at people to get out of the way. The guards started clearing people out of the area before the gate, preparing their weapons. The merchant suddenly gripped my arm. "Come," he said, and started pulling me towards the city. "They will be closing the gates. Let's get in now." Looking desperately over my shoulder for Onyx and Illith, I let him drag me after him into the town, and he was correct. After the gate area had been cleared of people, the guards pulled it partially shut. Through the remaining gap, I could see a rider dressed in a similar uniform as the guards come galloping towards the gate. He stopped before the gate, whispered something to the most senior-looking guardsman. The guardsman looked up at him for confirmation, the rider nodding. Turning around, the guardsman ordered the guard to stand away from the remaining opening, and the rider continued through at full speed. Behind him, the gate closed with a deep thud. Not knowing where Onyx and Illith were, I stood on the inside of the stone wall next to my newfound friend. As I had, the merchant had been looking closely at the arrival of the rider, and then watched him racing past us at speed that was probably not safe inside a crowded city. The merchant returned his gaze to me, appearing to consider me for a short moment before he said, "Come," and he indicated for me to follow. He started moving through the crowds, and he appeared quite agile, quicker than I would have expected from someone of his size. He was moving in the same general direction as the rider had, but after passing several side streets, he took to the left, and we continued until we came to the wall surrounding the town. The street opened up into an open square, a statue in the middle of a heroic-looking rider on a horse, looking significantly more impressive than the one I had seen in Glade Hill. One side of the square was dominated by what looked like a church, and he hurried to the side of this building, me in tow. The right side of the church, right next to the wall, had a side entrance, and looking quickly up and down the street, he opened his door and pushed me in. Following me behind me, he closed the door and started running up a set of stairs. I followed, and there were many stairs, the staircase continuing up for quite some distance. There were several small windows facing the outer wall on each level, and eventually I could see that they were higher than the wall. The stairs continued for some additional distance, and eventually we came out at a small area on the top of the church. We ran to the middle where a small set of stairs led up to what looked like a bell tower. Eventually, out of breath, we reached the top. Rather, I reached the top. He was already there, not looking especially winded. He was standing near the side opening, and I went to stand next to him. The view was impressive. I could see the entire lower part of the city, and we were about the same height as the next level. But we still had a good view of everything up to the final gate of the topmost castle. "It looked like urgent news," the merchant commented. I just nodded, still attempting to catch my breath. "From here we can see how urgent." He indicated the outside with his right hand. Simply put, the higher up, the more important the people that are there. And the more urgent, the higher the rider will pay. Seemingly satisfied with his explanation, he rested both hands on the railing and looked upwards. I stood to stand next to him. He pointed. "See, that is the gate to the next level. The major and other people responsible for maintaining the city can be found on that level. If the matter that concerns the rider is of relevance to the city, he will ride there, but not further." We waited a little in silence, the sounds of the city reaching us from below. Not long after, we could see a guardsman at the gate starting to move defensively. A rider appeared, stopped, and shortly after, the rider passed through. "So, at least, of relevance to the city," he nodded with satisfaction. He pointed to a point higher up. "Beyond that gate sits those that concern themselves with the matter of the contract. Should there, for example, have been a Major accidents such as a village being buried under a mudslide or a rebellious duke, well, that would be the concern for those that sit on that level. Again, some moments of silence as we watched the gate. Nothing appeared to happen. Then we saw a variation of the events we now had seen several times. The guards, and on this level, it looked like the guards were much better armed. Sunlight glinting off their armor, indicating metal plates, suddenly started moving. They quickly got into a well-ordered defensive position before the gate. Then a rider appeared, had a quick word with one of the guards, whereupon the guards in front of the gate were waved away, and the rider continued. Interesting, the merchant said. So now the question becomes, does the rider stop there? He continued. The last level, the castle, now that is where the king can be found. Nowhere higher to go. Let's see. He did not appear concerned, more like he was enjoying an amusing show. Again we waited, but the distances at the top were shorter, so the wait time was also shorter. The castle gate had not only what appeared to be knights in plate armor in front of the gate, there was also a portcullis, a drawbridge, and soldiers stationed on top of the castle walls. On these levels, the soldiers were already alert, maybe they always were. But it was still possible to see that they reacted to something. This time it was not the rider, but someone on foot that came running towards the gate. There was a short exchange with what appeared to be a heavily armed individual standing in front of the drawbridge. Behind him were several soldiers with their spears lowered, pointing towards the runner. A short moment later, the person in front of the drawbridge turned and waved his hands upwards. The soldiers raised the spears, and the portcullis was pulled up. The runner continued to run across the bridge and disappeared into the castle. Okay, the merchant said, nodding. We have seen what there is to see. Let's go. Let's go. Not really knowing where we were going, I followed him down the stairs. He half ran down the stairs and he shouted in my direction while he ran. I guess you can imagine what would be required for the king to be involved. The primary reason would be if there were a foreign threat. He turned forward again, and it almost sounded like he was laughing as he barreled down the stairs, me doing our best to keep up. A priest dressed in a pure white robe and carrying a big book and a candle looked at us with big eyes as we passed him at high speed. Where was Onyx and Ilrith, I wondered. When the outer gate had been closed, Onyx and Ilrith were still standing far enough from the entrance that I could not get in. The rider had bent down from the leader of the guards at the outer gates and whispered in his ear. Carefully applied air magic brought the whispers to the ears of Onyx. Soldiers from the Demon Kingdom have attacked a caravan on the road to Glade Hill. I must inform the king. She looked at Ilrith and nodded. Quick, Ilrith said, before they closed the other gate. Seeing Onyx glance toward the gate, she continued, don't worry, we'll find him later. Jumping over hedges and fences, they sprinted along the wall until they were almost at the next gate. Then, walking as nonchalantly as possible, they passed by the guards and got through the gate. No message had evidently reached this gate yet, but they had not gotten far before they could hear shouting behind them. No matter, they had gotten inside. They walked briskly towards the center of the city level. So, Ilrith said, what do you want to do now? I want to know what the king is doing. Ilrith was silent and would continue. I think perhaps that we should announce ourselves at the next gate. Ask for a meeting with the king. They continued walking a little further, Ilrith thinking. Are you sure that is wise? Ilrith asked. We'll say we were visiting the town and they heard rumors that something dangerous had happened, potentially impacting neighboring states. Ilrith responded, and convinced, Onyx continued, let's go as soon as possible. By the time we get to the castle, rumors of the event should have spread throughout the city anyway. Okay, Ilrith nodded. Then smiling a smile, either innocent or mischievous, maybe today will be a day when he does not mind having a visit from Calamity Onyx, crazy Ilrith. Onyx snorted abusedly. It went more or less as Onyx had suspected. Since they were on a different side of town than the one the rider had taken, they managed to get to the next level. They managed to get to the next level through another entrance before that gate shut down. When they were close to the next level, they removed their cloaks and no longer hiding their presence, they walked with a kind of self-assured self-confidence that would identify them as royalty even if no one recognized who they were, but recognized they were, people quickly getting out of their way. The guard responsible for the gate looked on with increasing panic as he saw who was coming his way. He tried to stall and protest a little, but he was outmatched. And not long after, the two were walking through the gate. They were now in the level below the castle, which was smaller than the levels below, but still covered a larger area than the center of Gladewood Village. The designer of this part of the city had evidently been confident in the protection provided by the lower levels. The main street led straight from the gate they had entered to the entrance of the castle, which along with the mountain top loomed above them. It looked very impressive, even if it would not provide much defense in the case of an invasion. And as if their presence was a matter of course, they continued their walk towards the castle entrance. Word of their presence quickly preceded them, and the crowds parted before them as they walked the last part of the distance to the drawbridge leading to the castle area. Thinking that a disaster seldom comes alone, the soldier responsible for granting access to the castle watched the two princes approach him. But having a lot of experience with nobility and royalty, he would not be easily bullied, and at this point their progress was a little slower. A messenger was sent into the castle, and the soldier waited tensely for the messenger to return. He and his companion painfully aware that if these two wanted to enter the castle, there was very little they could realistically do to stop them. Bilbo then smiled politely and nodded gracefully when he indicated that he would need to notify the king of their arrival before they could be announced. A few minutes later, the messenger returned, and the very relieved soldier could inform them that he was happy to welcome them to the castle and apologized deeply for having made them wait. They nodded politely and went past him as the portcullis was opened or lifted. He looked after them, at least now they were not his problem. Hopefully. He sighed while looking up at the cloud-free sky, and this had started as such a fine day, he thought to himself. Down on the street level again, the man started walking briskly. Me doing the best I could to keep up. We never got a chance to be properly introduced, the man said. Oh, I answered, right, very pleased to meet you. I am but a humble traveller to these lands, Assemblus be my name. The man stopped shortly, taking my hand, and by looking at my eyes, he shook my hand and handshake firm. In my experience, the truly humble rarely describe themselves as such. I am Friedrich, a humble servant of these lands. I smiled and nodded, delighted to make your acquaintance. He continued looking at me consideringly for a short while longer. Then, appearing to have made some kind of decision, he set off again. Not really knowing what to say, I said, one does wonder what message the messenger brought with him. A foreign threat, you say? That sounds very serious. What was the name of the country I passed through to get here, Orende? Are they perhaps on unfriendly terms with this country? King Waldreth? No, he is friendly enough. When there is talk of invasion, there is usually only one place they come from, he said. Or maybe this demon kingdom I have heard tales of. Perhaps they are not so far from here. You could say that, he answered. The relations have been cordial since the latest demon king took over. He appears to be of the more philosophical sort, but maybe has grown tired of philosophy. I suppose that's a possibility, I answered. We walked in silence for some distance, and I took the chance to look around me. We were still on the lowest level, but we had crossed most of the distance from the outer wall to where the mountain started. The part of the city where we were in now were less crowded with people and had mostly smaller houses. You seem to be quite knowledgeable about these matters, I said. Are there perhaps some other places that might represent danger? Some other nations or regions that are perhaps unfriendly? He stopped, looking at me questioningly. You certainly seem to have some unusual ideas. It truly does not seem to be from here. Anywhere in particular you have in mind? He looked at me, then continued walking, perhaps even more briskly than earlier. Oh, not being from here, I couldn't say, but thinking about it logically, if the source of the problem is not the north, and the country to the west, as you say, is not a problem, perhaps the country to the east. East Wildmoor? No. I would say we have very cordial relations with them. I see, I continued. How about these elves I keep hearing about? He shook his head. No, they have been peaceful for several human generations. So, any countries further away? The Brightwall Empire, perhaps? Not impossible, but they are so rule and tradition bound to do they are too rule and tradition bound to do anything that did not involve long negotiations and lengthy demands and declarations of war. We would know far in advance. We continued walking. He stopped. You are not going to ask about the south. Oh, right. The south, you don't have the sea on your southern border. No, not a sea. He looked thoughtful as he continued walking. Not long after, he stopped in front of a nondescript house, having one wall against the side of the mountain. You have given me some things to think about. I see that I was wrong to think that this evening would be wasted. Follow me. We entered the house. I looked around before following. The entrance was in a narrow alleyway, formed by the house he had disappeared in and the house next to it. Looking back down the way we had come, I could see that there were two men standing at the entranceway. I had not made any particular notice of them on our way in, seemingly just two persons that happened to hang out on a street corner. But looking more closely, I could see that they had that familiar feeling of goons that were very deliberately trying to appear to not do anything deliberate at all, especially not standing guard at a particular street corner, keeping track of anyone that enters or leaves. Or were they perhaps a little bit more disciplined than simple goons and soldiers, perhaps? Looking towards the door with an increased sense of curiosity, I followed. Inside I could see the merchant looking back at me impatiently at a flight of stairs leading down into a basement. I looked into the rooms on either side of the corridor as I passed them, and they looked like the normal home, or at least as normal as I could envision a home looking in this world, considering that I had not visited any. That is, apart from the people inside it. All of them were dressed in what looked like normal street clothes, similar to what most of the people who had passed in the street. But they were all physically fit, clearly very aware to the point of alertness of me being there, without directly looking in my direction. No, this was not a normal house. These were definitely some type of muscle. Was this person I was following some powerful merchant noble? I followed her down the stairs, and I could see nothing out of the ordinary. A storage room filled with shelves and various types of easily preservable foodstuffs at the end. The man went to the opposite wall, the one facing the mountainside, his back to me, appeared to be doing something. A soft click, and a portion of the wall swung outwards. A lantern-lit room appeared to lie beyond the opening. He beckoned for me to follow, and I did. A small room with another very solid-looking door on the other end. Closed slide panel at head height set in the door. Closed the door behind us and knocked on the door. The panel opened, and after a couple of seconds closed again. Then the door opened, and again he beckoned for me to follow. A large room, clearly built for defense. Weapons were neatly lined up against the wall, and the men standing at attention when I entered the room were clearly soldiers, all wearing uniforms. I was starting to get a suspicion of where this was going. The man, who I was increasingly starting to suspect was not a merchant, grabbed one of several lanterns hanging on the wall. A soldier held open a door on the opposite end of the room, and we went through. We were now clearly inside the mountain, the corridors being hewn out of the rock. The walls were very cleanly cut, and there was no humidity or dropping water. This had evidently not been done haphazardly. We passed several side passages disappearing into the darkness. After some zigzagging inside the mountain, we eventually came to a stairwell, the first of many stairwells, all leading up. I already thought I would die when we were at what turned out to be the halfway point. The man waited patiently for me. Each time I slowed down, but it was increasingly becoming embarrassing, since he was showing no signs of strain at all. I would clearly have to do something to become more physically fit if I was to survive in this world. Apart from the endless stairs, there were not much to see. Sometimes we came to floors where the corridors were leading off into the darkness. At other times, there were small guard posts with a couple of alert guards stationed. We eventually came to a point where there was a clear separation between the upper and lower areas. To this area, from a lower portion of the tunnels, we had to pass through a strong defensive position. The corridor narrowed and turned, making it impossible to apply any significant amount of physical force on the door. There were also holes of various sizes in both of the walls, the ceiling and the floor. Most likely traps and weapons can be used to dispatch anyone trying to enter through this way. When we got through the entrance, we came into what felt like a huge area. The light did not illuminate the entire place, but there were many doors and openings I could see with the little light that shone from my lantern. Above this area, the corridors seemed to be meant to be part of the defense of the town. There were regular openings or windows showing the outside of the mountain. From what I could see, we were a little higher than the last portion of the city before the castle. The windows would probably have a good overview of the entrance to that portion of the city. I walked a little further, and the man told me to wait. This floor had another of the many guard posts inside this mountain, and the man went to talk to those that were inside. Happy for the break, I leaned against a wall, debating with myself whether I should sit down or if it would be too tiring to have to get up again afterwards. While contemplating this dilemma, I suddenly got a feeling of increased awareness. It was something strange, some flickering of the light. I held my breath trying to identify the source of what I was seeing. There, out of the corner of my eye, I could sense some movement. It was another of the windows looking out onto the city below, and quickly turning in that direction, for a moment I thought I could see a face looking up over the edge of the window, concerned eyes looking in my direction. Then it disappeared. I went up to the window and looked out, but there was nobody there. I checked the wall above and beside the window, but nothing strange. There did, however, appear to be a quite large white feather on the windowsill. I picked it up, and it was very light, almost weightless. Also very pleasant to the touch, and slowly stroking the feather, I felt a little better. I could not remember ever having seen a feather like this, and was wondering what kind of bird had feathers like this when the man shouted that it was time to continue. I quickly put the feather inside my cloak, a little extra spring in my step as we continued upwards. Eventually, we got to the top. We passed through several guarded doors, similar to the ones that had been at the entrance of the tunnels. Then we exited into what turned out to be the castle at the top of the mountain. "You appear unused to travel for one who has traveled far," was the only comment he made. "Perhaps not the news you wish to hear, but this is the basement. We still have some walking to do." I nodded, having long since given up hope of ever having any feeling in my legs again. Walking through the castle like he owned it, we made our way up several more flights of stairs, the surroundings becoming ever more impressive as we went. Eventually, we were at what I assume was the ground floor, a huge courtyard surrounded by an impressive fortification that could be seen through the windows. Through a massive gate with a raised portcullis, I could see a lowered drawbridge and the top of the houses of the buildings on the level below. I had made it to the top. A huge door on the left side led to the courtyard. Opposite it, on the other side of the white corridor, was another huge set of doors, these closed. The man indicated a door all the way at the end of the corridor. Go in there. There should be comfortable seating, and ask for some water. You are looking dehydrated. Nodding weakly, I used the last of my strength to walk down the corridor and open the door. Inside, I saw several people, most of them already sitting down. To my utter surprise, there was no one in the room I did not know or did not know who were. One person was standing, even though I had not seen him close. This was undoubtedly the rider that had arrived the message of the attack on the caravan. Was he still waiting to meet the king? Sitting on the bench was Onyx and Ilres. What on earth were they doing here? Both of them without their cloaks, wearing their uniforms and looking very much like the royalty that they were. Onyx had even removed her eye patch. While I could hardly believe my eyes, they hardly reacted at all. Onyx smiled confidently in my direction, like saying, "What took you so long?" They continued talking with Ilrethus, who waved shortly, then also she ignored me. Some distance away from them sat the bone seller. He nodded lightly in my direction, so I went to sit down next to him. "Ah, visited assemblies, you do not know how happy I am to see you again in this occasion." And he did look happy, or at least pleased. And I think perhaps this is a good point to end it for today. There are events that will be happening after this, of course, but this is a good place to end it. And we managed to get through a bit. Now we have had the heroes arrive in this new city. And the next thing that happens will naturally be them meeting the king. And yes, I think the next part is the last part of the first part of the story. So, right, read through that next time. And so, I sort of wonder how original things are, but I often have the feeling that I have written things that I have seen or experienced or read earlier, but at least in this case, I don't know exactly where it would be, even though some of it does seem familiar, but it's difficult to be original with this type of content, so I guess that's okay. And so I think this type of city structure is amusing. So if you are building a castle on top of a mountain and you have the city built around it, I guess it's natural also to try to make use of the mountain to the best extent that's possible. You have some interesting possibilities of creating defensive positions and escape routes and so on. That is what it appears to have been done in this town. So this is the capital of the country next to the one the hero first arrives in. And I guess that's a nice place to end it. So hopefully I'll be able to continue soon and try to finish the first part. But for now, I think I'll say thank you for listening and bye bye.